I really wanted one of those $13,000 eFoil boards, but I wasn't ready to spend that kind of money on one. Fortunately for me, my friend Klaus said he could build one for less than $3,000.
After doing a lot of reading on Foil Zone and several other forums, I got a rough shape that I wanted to work with for the board. And this is the foam that we're going to be making the board out of. It's a 2-inch thick insulation board from Home Depot. Getting the blanks all cut and glued together. Since the nose was extra thick, I had to cut in a small piece to make the nose a little thicker to allow for the profile we were working with. This is a laser cut profile, and we're laying on here, gluing to the side of it to allow us to guide the hot wire to cut the foam blank out. So here's the little hot wire I threw together just to be able to cut this thing out without making too huge of a mess. Actually worked pretty well, not perfect. And then we have the main profile of the board cut out. Here I'm starting to mix some fiberglass with some glass spheres and a little bit of black dye. I'm going to be doing a initial coat of epoxy over the board to fill in the areas that got melted during the hot wire. As we're prepping here for the angled cuts on the side of the board. I'm starting to saw cut the sides of the board off to get the final profile of everything. More sanding and shaping to try and get the board into final shape. We're routing out the opening for the rear electronics compartment where the wiring and everything will come up out of the mast. And we're doing the same thing for the front hatch, which is going to be a storage area for phone, keys, whatever you got on you on the lake. There's a 3D printed template to route out the pocket for the metal mast plate I created earlier. The 3D scan I took of the mast top plate aligned up here when I was designing everything where all the holes go to seat down into the foam. That seats in there pretty nicely. Cut all the way through the board into the compartment we cut earlier. Here we're starting to route out the main electronics compartment. There's a lot of foam that needed to be cut out for this. The router made decent work of it, but it was a huge mess. There's the board all roughed out. So this is the 3D printed shell for the battery itself. This battery is built with the Molicel P42A cells. There's a 14S 10P battery pack welded with a K-weld setup. And I'm doing a first test fit of the battery, make sure everything is fitting in the 3D printed shell properly. I'm getting the balance leads soldered on from the BMS. And here is the last test fit of the fully assembled battery module going into the case. It fights me a little bit. So these are some brass inserts that are melted into the plastic part to give us metal threads for clamping the top and bottom shell of the battery case on. This is the negative for our main electronics enclosure fiberglass part. After this is printed, fiberglass is applied directly to this part. So these are the threaded inserts that'll be made into the fiberglass electronics enclosure to allow the lid to be screwed on later. Here's my laser cutter set up. I'm cutting a piece of plywood to be the top piece of the electronics enclosure fiberglass mold. You can see we're starting to get the fiberglass ready and get that mold created. Lots of layers of fiberglass. I'm trying to do a vacuum bag to make it all nice and compact. So here's the fiberglass electronics compartment, test fitting that, and everything seats down in there. Room for the battery, speed controller, and here are our hatches for the front and back. And that's the rough idea. Okay, this is mixing up a bunch of extra thick epoxy with fumed silica so we can glue in the storage compartment that I 3D printed for the front of the board and make sure that doesn't go anywhere with your phone in it. And we're doing the same thing with the metal mast attachment plate on the back, getting that all buttered up with thickened epoxy, smashing it down into place, feathering it out a little bit so the transitions aren't too rough. I've glued in the electronics compartment with some great stuff expanding foam. Unfortunately, there was nowhere for it to vent out, and this ended up splitting the side of the board and bulging out the bottom, making an enormous mess, trying to recover from this. So this is our repair, gluing in more foam to repair the sections that were damaged from the expanding foam. We found an off-the-shelf foil and mast combination. My design for the motor mount, this is also largely based on what I've seen other people do on Foil Zone. This front plate I cut out on a CNC mill, opening here for the water that's coming in through the nose cone and then into the mast to cool the speed controller. So here I'm 3D scanning the mast and motor mount. So we're using this scan to make an adapter to take the water that's coming through the nose cone, through the motor mount, and send it into the opening in the side of the mast to go up to the electronics, into the speed controller to keep it cool, and out an exhaust port in the bottom of the board. Doing the same 3D scanning to the top of the mast to make that irregular shape fit the 10mm diameter hose to go into the speed controller. Threading all of our cooling and power connections up through the mast adapter. And this is a 3D printed TPU gasket we were trying to make work that ended up eventually getting replaced by rubber. I'm doing a first test fit with the mast to see how everything looks put together. Getting it all bolted down nice and tight. And here I'm testing it with a spare 72 volt e-bike battery. Make sure everything's functioning properly. Test fitting the nose cone, seeing how everything fits together. You can see the cooling inlet port on the front of the nose cone. And here I'm installing the heat set inserts into the motor mount, that these will be used to hold the nose cone onto the board. We can have a nice strong metal thread and a plastic part. Getting another piece of wood into the laser cutter. This is going to be for the actual electronics compartment lid, and this will be covered in epoxy to waterproof it as well. So I 3D scanned the foam cutout for the rear electronics enclosure after everything had been put together, so I could design the insert for that to fit nicely. Our phase wire connections, our charger port, our power button, and our cooling water connection going into the battery compartment. Assembling the rear electronics compartment. This is a 3D printed part that the hatch will be screwed onto after the fiberglass. And this is more of the thickened epoxy that I'm using to glue everything together. Starting to get all the wiring ran from the rear electronics compartment into the main electronics compartment. These are the charging wires. Soldering all the jumpers for the phase wire connections. Getting those all ready to go to be installed into the board. Here I'm drilling the drain for the water that comes out of the speed controller. Will drain through this port at the bottom of the board. Doing some more body work to fill in gaps and make everything a bit smoother before dealing with any fiberglass. And we're doing even more Bondo to try and finish that repair on the bottom and just finish overall smoothing up the damage to the board. So we're filling this gap in between the two compartments with great stuff to allow that to be sealed. Doing some last touch-ups with some Bondo. At this point we're preparing to start fiberglassing the board itself. I'm doing 3 layers of 6-ounce e-glass on the bottom and top of the board. Scrap carbon fiber from another project, so we went ahead and put a little reinforcement patch right at the nose. And here we're doing the top coat of resin, tinted black, to start getting the final color of the board. Doing the same thing as on the bottom, 3 layers of 6-ounce e-glass. We tinted the resin for all 3 layers on this one just to make it nice and dark colored. Doing just a rough sand of the fiberglass. Get everything nice and smoothed out, and the transition blended pretty well. So here we're starting to epoxy our lid to make it nice and watertight. And here is the flood coat for the bottom of the board. Make it look nice and good, or at least not too bad. Never done anything like this before, but I think it came out all right, as long as you're far enough away. The last flood coat of resin on the top of the board, make it nice and shiny. And same thing for the electronics compartment hatch. Just gotta let it cure. Before the top coat of resin fully cures, peeling off our masking tape to try and let that blend into each other a little bit better, hopefully reducing the seam that's left over. And we're doing the same thing inside of our front hatch, same thing for our rear electronics enclosure, and finally the main electronics enclosure. Gonna get all the masking peeled off of that. We're prepping to do a pour-in 2-part silicone gasket for part of the seal between the hatch lid and the board itself. We're starting to do final assembly here, getting the phase wire connections for the ESC to the mast, and connecting the charging wires that are coming from the rear electronics enclosure to the plug that connects into the battery to allow everything to charge nicely. Ended up going a little overboard with the silicone on the battery case itself, just to be certain if water does ever get in there, nothing will get into the battery itself. Making sure there's plenty of silicone down inside all the screw holes. Definitely going overboard, but I'm going to be 100% sure there is no leaks ever. Make sure all of our settings are correct. We're sealing on the electronics enclosure lid with all this silicone to make sure everything is watertight. It is meant to not have to come off ever unless there's a big problem. The front and rear hatches also with lots of silicone because you can't be too careful. We're opening up the holes on the bottom for the mast mounting holes. And we're applying the foam grip tape to the top of the board, trimming the foam around the hatches so those can be installed with that piece of foam on top. I'm doing a little freehand trimming here to make the nose, give it a little shape, make it look a little better. And here for the first time is the completely finished board. I'm showing our front storage compartment, all the random junk you can toss in there. We set up a pool in the backyard here to get this thing fully assembled and test submerge it, try and find out if we have water coming in anywhere before we get it out and have something fail on us. And here we are at the lake, getting this thing put together for the first time, ready to get out on the water. In it goes. It is a little heavy. First test drive around, laying on the board. Everything seems to be functioning so far.
That's when we were reminded that I am not good at this. So I took a week to work on it. Not that I can do anything special on it, but it all feels pretty special.